We're back, and it's COMP391. It's week 6, lesson 6, part 2. Last video, we talked about text in Blender, which is, I think we kind of scratched the surface there. There's lots of different techniques you can use to make text interesting. Now we're going to get into the elements of game. So let's say we've used Blender up until now for creating models and so on. You got a couple of assignments, or one of your assignments in your test, your first couple things you did was all about model creation. But now we want to, I mean, this thing is called, it's not called modeling, this course, right? It's called Intro to Game and Simulation, right? So what we want to talk about is how to use Blender to create game elements. Well, Blender is not just a modeling engine, it's also a game engine. And that's why, if you notice these different modes up here, we've been playing with from the beginning. Blender render, you know, there's different rendering engines. Cycles rendering does a lot more photorealistic images. We're not going to get into that right now. Maybe we'll touch upon it by the end. Blender game is where I want you to get into, right? So let's make a simple game, okay? And I'll talk about how we're going to do this now. This is kind of going to be really fun. Let's leave our main object here, and let's make this our hero object, right? So how do we do this? First of all, let's rename this from cube, right, to hero. So this is our hero object. Hey, we already got a game, right? Because we have a hero object. It's a cube. Let's add a couple of things to make it more interesting. Our hero object, right? One of the things is I want to go into my material, and let's make our hero object green for good, right? And let's make our enemy objects red for bad, right? So our hero, we're going to make this a green. Rename this material green, right? We'll leave it specular as well. We'll leave the specularity and the brightness, intensity, and so on as is. I'm not going to change that right now. I'm not going to make it shadeless. I want it to be with shade. One thing I do want to do is I want to look at it from this perspective. So if you look at, if I go from a top-down perspective, and if it's top ortho mode for a second, oops, there we go. If you notice, the right arrow goes to the right, and the red arrow, which is the X arrow, and the Y arrow goes to the top. In game, it's important that you get this kind of orientation if you start off a basic game, and I'll explain that later on. If I go back into perspective mode now, right? So here's my perspective mode. I still got the right orientation. The red arrow, the X arrow, is pointing to the right, and the green arrow is pointing up, and so is the blue arrow, which is my Z arrow, right? This is approximately where you should start off with your game. Okay, next, we're going to Shift A, and we're going to add in there, oops. We're going to Shift A, and we're going to add in a mesh, a plane mesh. Let's do that. Okay, now the plane is buried inside of this object here because it's how big it is. So I'm going to go S to scale, and we're going to go 20. Okay. I want to move this plane down, so I'm going to grab the blue arrow on top of my handlebar here and move it down so it's just underneath the object. If you look at it from underneath, the plane is just a flat piece of paper right now, equivalent, and it's underneath my cube. Let's give it a material. I'm going to go new for material. I'm going to click on diffuse and change this so it's kind of a brownie material. Kind of a brownie material, like a light brown. We'll make this specularity, I'll turn it right down to nothing. So I don't want it specular at all. I want it to be very matte, the ground, right, for now. And what I want to do with the ground is I want to change the material so it says, you know, call it brown. I want to immediately change in my outliner from a plane to ground, just so we can identify it later on. Again, the outliner is this top right corner here, right? So I've got my plane that's ground and my character, my hero, right? For now, that's enough. I think we've got some good elements here, right? One more thing. If we press the N button and go into the numeric sidebar here, if you go in here, we want to definitely turn on shading to GLSL. That's important, right? Say shading to GLSL. And I also want to change my, from object mode, I want to leave it at object mode, but I want to go and change my shading, my viewport shading from solid to at least texture to give me that glow. So I know that this is what my game is going to look like. Press N to get out of numeric mode, T to get out of our transformation tab there, right? And kind of zoom out a little bit so I can see my plane board. I've got a light source, This is cool, right? Move my light source towards me a little bit. Now this is the problem. If I press 0 on the numeric keypad, if I want to keep this view, right, as an example, when I play my game, well then if I press 0, my camera's way over here, right? I don't want my camera to be there. I want my camera to be behind me, like this, right? So I'm going to press N again to bring up my numeric sidebar here. So this is just the setup right now. And what I want to do is I want to click on that lock camera to view. And what I want to do is I want to press 0 again, and I want to scroll my view over to kind of match up what I saw before. So I'm going to kind of scroll my camera out. See the red? You see this red border? It's going to happen because I've got my lock camera to view on, right? So there's definitely one way to do that. There's my lock camera to view. So my camera's here. I want to kind of zoom in. It's not quite where I want it. My camera's way out here now. Okay, there's my camera. It's behind my character. That's cool. Let me press 0 again. If you notice, it goes back to this view. So here's my camera. Here's my character without my camera. Right? I'm just toggling on and off. If I go back to camera, I'm going to unclick or deselect this lock camera to view and just move this so it's kind of fills up my screen a little bit more. And get rid of my N, my numeric sidebar. And if you notice, I'm just going to move this a little bit bigger too. That's my character, right? Now this is my view. The other way to do it is, because right now if I go to camera, if I press 0 on my numeric keypad, right, that's my user perspective, that's my camera mode, right? So if I want my camera to match up with my user perspective, camera is important when we play game. We haven't talked about it too much. We got to go to view, right? And if you go to align view, right, we can also say align active camera to view. If I do that, which is also Control Alt Numpad 0, right, then my camera becomes it kind of aligns my camera to the view that I'm at. Right? That's also what you can do. So if you notice, I'm looking kind of down with my camera. Let's go back and fix that. I'm going to go back into N for my numeric sidebar, right? And on the right, I'm going to choose lock camera to view. I'm going to kind of increase it so I can see just the horizon line for my character, right? And then I'm going to unlock it again and kill my numeric sidebar. So I think this is the view that I'd like you to start with for now. If I press P, right? P is play mode. And if you notice, this is what it looks like in play mode. I've got my character, and I've got my view, and it doesn't do anything right now. But P sets it up so that I can go into play mode, if you will. I'm going to press escape. All right, let's take a look at this. So my character's in here. All right, I want to start programming my logic. We've never done logic before, and you guys have done programming already once, right? A couple times. What are you guys doing? Java now? You guys doing Java yet? What's that? C sharp still? So this is like you're doing COMP391, I'm guessing? That's good, right? So if I zoom out here a little bit, right, I can zoom in and out. So this is what I'm seeing. This is where my camera is, right? And if I kind of move my camera back to this, to my user perspective mode, so I've toggled off camera mode, user perspective mode. It's almost the same. Just my camera mode is way back here. If I kind of move my view around, you can see my camera's way back here. Look, it's looking at my user, right? Okay, cool. So let's start like this. This is my block. Now there's different modes. Remember last time from a perspectives, different view. I can go here, and if you notice, I'm right now I'm in default view. I can go into 3D view full. That's what this does. I can go into animation mode, which is this. Gives me some split screens. I can go into compositing mode, which you've seen before when we're using our UV mapping. I can go into back to default. That takes me here. I can go into game logic, which takes me here in a flat mode. Some people like to work in this mode for game logic. So let's start here. So game logic is this other view. If I keep going, if I go to motion tracking, it's another view. And we haven't touched these. Scripting, if you want to do some scripting view, if I want to script in Python, because that's what the language of Blender is, right? Which is totally cool. If I want to go to UV editing, just from a UV mapping perspective, that's another little view. There's also video editing, if I'm doing any kind of video, like creating a movie, which you can totally do with Blender, right? And let's go back to game logic for a second. Okay, we set up our view in our default view. Game logic view is cool, but there's one thing to notice. On the bottom here, our mode, our viewport mode right now is solid. I want to move us into at least texture. And so we get that look of where our lighting is again. We're already in GLSL mode, which is cool. On the right here is a little script window, which we're not going to use. But this is where normally, if we were doing any scripting, we can actually do it right here. Okay, I can actually create a new script and everything else in Blender and do it here. We're not going to do that, but I can definitely add additional things down in here. Now, if this seems to be very small for you, there's a couple things you can do, right? First of all, I have the ability to move my script off screen a little bit. We're not going to use that right now. This is important, an outliner, because the outline view is good because I can highlight my objects that I'm programming a little bit easier on the left. That's why this view is so nice, right? What I do sometimes do originally is make this programming view a little bit bigger because I don't need to see this too big in programming view. And here, if you notice how these small areas are, there's 3 sections: sensors, controllers, and actuators, right? Now, this is really small. I'm going to make it bigger. I'm going to scroll in, just like I normally would scroll into an object. And you can actually do this with any panel. I'm going to make this game properties a little bit smaller. And I'm going to focus in on sensors for a second so you can see the sensors. So I'm going to kind of scroll in so you can see sensors, my sensor objects a little bit. This is the maximum scroll size, so you guys should be able to see this nicely. Take a look at sensor here. If I click on sensor, right now my lamp is highlighted. This would be bad. Whatever is highlighted is what I'm going to be adding logic bricks to, or logic programming code. Blender has a bunch of pre-programmed blueprints, if you will, that are called logic bricks. All right. Now the thing is, we can change the properties of these logic bricks and add interactivity to our objects. Okay. So the one thing is, I don't want to focus on my lamp. And if you notice right now, my lamp in the outliner is highlighted. And if you notice down here, it shows my lamp object. I'm going to add a sensor to my lamp object. I don't want to do that. I want to click on my hero object. Now, if you notice, hero is the main object. Okay, cool. If I click add sensor, I want to make it, so let's say for now, I want to move it around with my keyboard sensor. A sensor is almost like, think about it as an event listener, right? Events happen in programming where something, an action, right, triggers an event, right? So let's say if I click a button on my keyboard, it triggers a keyboard event to fire, to trigger, right? That's what it does. So any kind of keyboard button push I do triggers this keyboard event. That's what it does. And we call this, when we program in different languages, we create an event listener to listen for this kind of event, because all kinds of events are happening in computers all the time. When you press on a button, there's a button event, right? If you're scrolling, there's a scroll event, right? All kinds of events are happening all the time. So for us, what we want to do is we want to create a keyboard event for now. Let's try this. So I click add sensor, and I want to click on keyboard. Follow me here, because if you don't, you're going to get lost fairly quickly. Keyboard. Again, if you notice here on the left, there's little dialogue that looks like it's popped up, little panel actually, and there's a couple of other things. One is, if you notice this object here, you can rename it, this event listener. Right now it's just called keyboard, right? If you look at it over here, there's something called key. There's a little area to click in here. If I click in here, right, I can assign a key. I want to make it so that if I press the A key, right, I want to do something. So I'm going to press A as a key. I can also click all keys, which would be bad. Like press any key kind of thing, right? The A key is the one we want to use. We don't want to use any modifiers here. We'll leave those modifiers alone. I'm not going to choose toggle or target right now. Let's just leave all that alone. Okay, cool. I'm going to scroll over to the controller. What are controllers? Controllers are, think of them as your conditional statements, your if statements, if you will, right? If I click on my camera or my keyboard, and I connect them with these two things work together, then my controller basically takes my input from my sensor and sends it into my responder, if you will, which is called in Blender an actuator. Actuators are almost like the event handler or callback function. All right. So think about if you do an event listener. I'm listening for a keyboard click. My actuator is what does something, something that does the actions, right? So if I click on my actuator, I can add a motion actuator, right? And it kind of creates this new panel. If you notice, it's a very simple motion actuator right now because my hero is not a physics object. We're going to change that in a second, right? But if you notice, I can do things like my location. Here's my location. I can choose it so that when I click the A button, and if this is X and Y coordinates, which way do I want to move from a Blender unit's perspective on the X axis? Anybody? Josh, what do you think? If I click the A button, what direction do I want to move in my X axis? The left, right? So how would what value should I put here in my location? Now there's two little arrows here. If I go to the right, it actually increases the right. If I go yes. Now I recommend at least a -0.2 in this particular case. Now this is location, so it actually shifts location of the object 0.2 Blender units to the left every time I click the A button, or if I leave the A button held in this particular case. Okay, cool. I've got my list, my callback function. It's simple motion, and I've got my keyboard, right, which is my sensor. I've added a keyboard sensor. You know what? I'm going to name this, you know, left. Right? So I'm going to move left. Well, I got these two things, and I got these little circles that look here. Take a look at these two circles. I got this one, and I got this one. I'm not adding a controller right now. I'm going to take this one, drag it to create a little wire that wires up to my other one, and all of a sudden my controller is created for me. And right now the default controller is an AND type controller. There's different ones: exclusive NOR, exclusive OR, a NOR, an AND, and so on. These are almost like gates, logic gates. That's why this whole thing is called logic bricks, right? But let's leave it at AND. So both these two things have to be active. So the sensor has to be active and the actuator has to be around for the motion to happen, right? So think about this as an event listener and my callback function, the event handler, right here. So when my A key is pressed, then move my object, which is my hero object, 0.2 Blender units to the left. Okay, cool. A couple of things we have to change too. I still got my hero object. Sorry, I rotated this by accident. I still got my hero object selected. I'm going to scroll to the right here, way to the right up here on top. This is the same panel we have. I'm going to go to my physics panel right here. And if you notice, my object right now is a static object. That's bad. I want to make my object that I move around a dynamic object, right? So I'm going to choose this from static. I'm going to change this to dynamic. When I do that, my actuator changes from the way it was before to this, which is more, there's different options here. I can add force, torque, linear velocity, angular velocity, all kinds of other stuff from a physics perspective. Right now I don't need that. All I need is this -0.2. Okay, cool. And by the way, our motion, our actuators can be renamed as well. Right now it's called motion. I'm going to change this to move_left, right? In code, it's important to do this because then I can access this with Python. If I wanted to learn Python, I know Python very well, but if I want to teach you guys Python, then I can certainly move left with my actuator here, right? If I was going to access this as a function or a method. Right now, we're not going to get there with this course. It's kind of out of scope. But I want you guys to focus on renaming things because it's important. Okay, so there's our keyboard sensor. All I've done is minimize this thing, this panel, right? I want to add in another sensor. Let's do it again. I'm going to add another sensor, another keyboard sensor. I'm going to add in, I'm going to click on the key. I'm going to add in my D key. So I've got my A key and my D key right now programmed, right? I'm going to minimize, I'm going to change this to right, the name of it to right. I'm going to scroll across to my actuator, add a motion actuator, right, as an example. And I'm going to change my motion to move right, right? And now, of course, I'm going to increase my x-axis. I'm going to change my position to my location on the x-axis by 0.2 Blender units to the right. Okay. Now I'm going to take my wire from here and wire this up too. Okay. If all things go well, right, I've got my left and my right keyboard buttons programmed to my A and my D keys, right? If I press up here, you have to be focused up here to do this, guys. Take a look. If I press P, and if I press A and D, I have motion. Okay. Now this is working here. If I press escape, I escape back into regular non-play mode, right? And if I change my view from my game logic view to default, let's go to default again. I'm back to here. I've got my logic wired up, right? If I press P, now if you notice I can go left and right on the big view, right? Because I've got my logic wired up. Okay, this is cool. Let's do some other tests. So my hero object is here. I want it to fall, so I'm going to click on my blue arrow to bring it above the line of my plane here. If I right-click on my plane and go, by the way, to the end, right? If I look at it, it's a static object, right? Well, this is good because that means it's not going to fall away. However, my player object is a dynamic object. That means it can be affected by physics, right? So if I go back to this, right, and I press P now, take a look what happens. Oh, it falls because physics is taking hold. Now, real physics, again, just as a recap, how fast do we fall in the real world, right? Remember we talked about this, I think, one time. How fast do we fall? How much? 9.8 meters per second, approximately, right? That's not really fast enough in a game, from a game perspective. We need to increase that. And the way to change that is in our game world. Well, there's another button. If you go here to world, the world button, right? It's kind of from the left, there's the little camera. So that's 1, 2, 3, the fourth button on the left, right? It says world. If you notice, if you go back down here, the physics type is bullet. There's different kinds. There's also none. You can also make your own and modify this thing. Gravity right now is set to 9.8. That's cool and all, but I really think what we want to do is get to like something like 30. Okay, 30 meters per second. It's a little bit faster falling. Not really realistic as much, but from a game perspective, it makes more sense, a little bit quicker. Right? So let's try this out again. Let's go P for play, and now you see it falls a little faster. Right? Let's try that again. P for play, and it falls much faster now. Our object falls much faster than 9.8 meters per second, which is I think is better. Okay, so our object's here, P for play, boom, falls, right? And I can move it. In fact, I can move it so good, if I zoom out a little bit, I can do it so good if I move to the right enough, right? Then it's gone. Right? Well, this is good left and right movement. I want you to add the W and S keys, right? Let's try to add the W and S keys so I can move up and down or forward and back around my Y-axis. All right, so go ahead and move forward and back now with the Y-axis. So to do that, I'm going to go back into logic mode, game logic, right? Here's my game logic. I want you guys to help me. So I need to add a sensor. What sensor am I adding? Keyboard sensor. Very good. Okay, in my keyboard sensor, I'm going to click this area here. What button for moving up? I said the W key. These are standard keys, by the way, as we all know, for gamers, right? And fine, I want to add a motion actuator, right? A motion actuator. This is cool, right? Now, from a motion actuator, I want to move in which axis? Up. Okay, what do I change this value to be here if I want to move up? 0.20, let's try that. All right, and if we're moving 0.20, in order for me to complete the circuit, I've got to drag and drop this wire from one axis to the other. Okay, let's rename this stuff. So I'm going to say move up. That's important to do. And also over here, instead of right, we're just going to call this forward. Actually, it's probably move forward is the right way. Move up means up, which is not right. So instead of move up, it should be move forward. That's more valuable. I'm going to minimize these things. How about let's do the back at the same time, forward and back, right? So let's add another keyboard sensor in there. We're going to call this back, and we're going to click on the key, and we're going to do the S key, right, for moving back. And I'm going to add another actuator, make another motion actuator, and if your right, if I click negative Y, 2 Blender units, it'll move back. So I'm going to say, I'll say move back as an actuator. And then I'm going to kind of connect these two things together with my wire. And now I have additional logic in there for my object where I can move forward and back. Let's try this out first here in our little logic editor by pressing the P key. So I can move forward and back, left and right. If I press both buttons at the same time, I move in a diagonal manner, right? So, cool, and press escape. Let's go back into our default mode, right? And if you notice that my object is off the ground, right? Whoa, here's my object off the ground, right? And now I'm going to press P to play. It's going to fall, move left and right, forward and back. Pretty quickly, actually, right? Hey, let's check this out. What if I go off the board? What happens? Ah, gone. Right? Let's try that again. Look, P for play, move off the board. Ah, should be gone. Right? Nice and easy. Questions so far? What have I done? Logic bricks is what these things are called in Blender, right? Logic bricks are just like blueprints for simple programming. If you were going to program this in C#, you'd do something like this. If the key is pressed, I'm doing pseudocode, if my left key is pressed, my A key, then call my move left callback method, right? And perform the left movement by moving across the, in three-dimensional space, point 2 Blender units to the left, or along the x-axis, negative 0.2, and so on. That's what these logic bricks do, in a nutshell. Okay, cool, cool. I want to add my enemy. Let's do this now, right? So how do I add my enemy? Well, I'm going to scroll in, right? And I want to change my position of my enemy. I'm going to go, I'll scroll back out again. Shift A. I'm going to add another mesh, which is going to be a sphere, right? Let's go make it an icosphere or a UV sphere. That might be better. Move this up. Here's my UV sphere, right? I'm going to rename this thing. Rename this thing enemy, right? My hero and my enemy. Okay. I'm going to add in another material, and I'm going to make it red because my enemies are bad. Right? So I'm going to make this enemy red, nice and red. If you notice, my enemy has, it looks like a spherical object with different planes. Like, so you look at, there's different faces. Right? I'm going to press the T key to make my transform toolbar come back. And I'm going to set smooth, shading to smooth that object out a little bit. Okay, cool. This object, I'm going to make it go back to the physics side of things over here, this physics icon, and change it from static to dynamic. So now my object my enemy is also a dynamic object. Okay, cool. Let us move my enemy down here somewhere. Right, so here's my enemy. It's going to drop from a height. I'm going to scroll back out, so I got still the same perspective, approximately that I had before, and down, and press the P key. Boom, my object falls, and now I'm going to bump into it. Oh, and it's I fell off too. Right. Start that again. So P key. I'm going to go into it from the side and move my object around. Watch. I can bump into it a little bit. Why? I've got basic collision working too, right? My physics comes with some basic colliders, right? Let's see. I can bump it around a little bit. Huh? It should roll, right? How come it's not rolling, right? Because I've made my object dynamic, right? Let's go back and make my enemy. Here's my enemy again. Let's change my physics from dynamic, right? So I'm going to talk about physics a little bit. From dynamic, let's change that to rigid body. Right, rigid body. Now, when I make it rigid body, it changes into an actor. If I go here, my dynamic is also an actor. If I don't make it an actor, nothing happens. Like, for example, this, right now, this static plane is not an actor. There's different things that happen when you make this an actor. I can use the near and radar sensors if I wanted to kind of use that later on, right? But for now, let's just focus on my enemy. It's a rigid body now. I've changed that to rigid body, right? And if you notice, my mass is 1 and my radius is 1 for my attributes. My form is 0.4. All those things I'm going to leave them as the same. I don't have the collisions bounds, and if I click on the collision bounds here for a second, if you notice the default collision bounds, I'm just going to zoom in here so you can see it. Whoa, my default collision bounds is this cube, right? That means even if I don't collide with the actual physical body, there's 2 types of collisions. Physical collision with my object, right, which would be the corners of the cube. If I collided up here somehow, even though I'm not seeing a collision here, still a collision. Because the way collisions work in most game engines, if I use a square, this is my collision boundary right here, right? Well, there's different kinds, right? Right now there's a box, there's also a sphere, right? That's a little better. By the way, sphere from a collision perspective takes more cycles when we play games, so more energy for the game, more CPU cycles than a box. A box is much easier for us to do collisions with. The most accurate for Blender, right, is convex hull. Right? We don't want to use that. If we use convex hull for every one of our objects, our game's going to be really slow. It's a very complex form of collisions. So let's keep it at sphere. That's enough. All right, cool. So we've added collision bounds for this. Let's add a collision bounds for our object too. So from our hero object, I'm going to go here. I'm going to keep him on dynamic for now. And I'm going to go to collision bounds. And I'm going to keep it a box because he is a box, right? So might as well keep it a box. All right, cool. Let's go back to that perspective that I like. So I'm going to kind of zoom out a little bit, change my perspective, and come down a little bit here, and zoom in a little bit, so I can see my object falling, right, like this. I'm going to press P. Let's try this out. P. Boom. All right. And now I'm going to kind of hit it. Right? How come it's not rolling like a ball? Come on, man. It's not rolling. It's not rolling over here. The other thing is the lighting is pretty bad, right? Let's add. So we got a light over here. Let us Shift D, and we're going to create another light along the x-axis over here, and we're going to go do the same thing. Shift D, and we're going to create another light along the x-axis over here. So we got a bit more lighting now. Let's press P again. Boom, right? And then we're going to move our object around, collide into it. But man, the hell? How come it's not? Well, it's not doing that. It's not rolling because every object has properties, physical properties, right? Like, for example, our plane. This is our ground. Take a look at our ground object, right? On the right, it shows that our object is not an actor, right? If we go into material for my plane, when we have in the game mode, our material doesn't just have material anymore. It also has physics that's associated with it. For example, friction. If I turn off my friction, right, as an example, what this thing can do, or turn it down, so now it's at 0.5. If I turn this right down to, let's say, 0.1, I make it more of a frictionless surface, right? That means that things will tend to slide more along it. A good example of that is, see my plane right now? It's flat. Let's rotate it a little bit. So I'm going to go rotate along the x-axis, let's say 10 degrees. Right? So there's a plane. It's kind of up now like this, 10 degrees. Let's look at it from the side. See? Now, if I press P, right, I'm going to start sliding because it'll roll all the way down, right? They're gone. Let's try that out. Again, watch. P, boom. Oh, we're going to roll off the screen, right? Because physics, we're doing this physics simulation, right? It's going to roll everything off the screen. If I fight it, if I press P, I press the W key, I can kind of fight physics a little bit, but not enough because I'm going to roll off the screen because, you know what? I'm falling at 30 meters per second, right? It's really big. Let's go rotate it back down. So I'm going to go rotate across the x-axis. Again, I'm going to go back to minus 10. Get back to flat again, right? As an example. Now there's no more rolling. Okay, cool. What about these other options here too? There's other ones, right? Like, for example, we've got friction. We've also got something called elasticity. Right now its elasticity is 0. If I turn this up to 0.5, which is quite high, it's about 0.5, and if I press P again, look what happens to my objects. Now, first of all, I still can't push this with any kind of torque. It's not going to roll, right? Well, because there's a couple things, right? Let's take a look at other things that the plane has. I'm looking at the plane. It has friction, force, from a force field perspective. Let's leave that alone. It has elasticity and dampening. My dampening is 0. I want my dampening to stay 0 for now. Okay, let's go back to my sphere. Select my sphere, and let's change my friction also down to 0.1. So go 0.1. And let's change my elasticity also to 0.5. Right? 0.5, 0.5, and press P. Boop. Oh man, bit of a bounce there, right? Let's take a look at that. Again, watch. Boom, right? Bit of a bounce, because my ground, I'm giving my ground some elasticity, and there's a bit of bounce and squash now happening with my sphere, right? Still a rigid body, but I can do more things with it. Other things to note. If I go back to my physics option for my sphere, because it's a rigid body and not a static object, right, I can go down here and select its mass. Right now my mass is 1. All objects by default have a mass of 1. It means they're equally massive, right? If I want to change my sphere so it's lighter, right? Example, I can go down to like 0.5 or less massive, or 0.2. Let's go 0.5, right? If I press P again, right, it's going to have a different effect. When it comes to my object pushing it around, it's going to slow me down less, and so on. Radius is the size, form, and so on. Let's leave all those the same, right? And it's also it says, use face normal to rotate objects so that it points away from the surface. Let's click that. Press P. And if I rotate it, if I actually roll it, you can't see it because it's not, you can't see the roll. But see, even if I'm moving it, I'm not adding force to it when I'm kicking it, right? That's not what my object is doing. My object isn't giving force. My object is physically moving around, my actor, right? In order for me to add force to an object, I've got to be able to impart force from me to that object, right? And I can do that by kicking it in, right? If I click Use Material, let's try that as well. So here I am. So I'm kind of zooming in, right? I can move my objects around the screen. These are good things. Okay, I can have more than one material to show you the stripe on the object. Cool. Now this is the power of making objects in Blender. I make my enemy. Think about what kind of enemy you want to make, right? Except I don't think one is enough. So I press Control Shift D to duplicate it, right? And I move it across the x-axis. Let's do it again. Shift D, duplicate it, move it across the x-axis. Shift D, duplicate it, move it across the z-axis. Shift D, duplicate it, move it across the x-axis. Shift D, duplicate it, move it across the x-axis. I've got a bunch of different balls now. I've got lots of balls, baby. Right? Okay, now let's press P and see what happens. Right? P. Okay, I got a little bit of roll. Right? I got some stuff going on here. I got more of a simulation going. And they're rolling now. Take a look. Because they're affecting themselves like they're different objects. Let's try that again. P. Right? Rolling. Why? Because when I click on any one of these objects, guess what? They all have a mass of 1 because they're all duplicates of each other. They all have, you know, the same radius. They all have the same kind of collision type. If I go to the material, they all have the same material, which is this elasticity of 0.5. If I increase this elasticity for 1, like for this one here, I make it so that it's 0.8, right, for the material. Guess what? All these now have 0.8 elasticity. Not just one, because they're using the same material. Right, same object. So if I press P, and now I make it so that they bounce a little bit more, right? Now they're going to act like balls that roll around, right? If I make the ground more elastic, if I increase the elasticity, let's say 0.75 in that range, now look and see what happens. P, right? And now we have even more bounce because now not only is one is elastic, everything else is elastic as well. You got a bit of a roll. Recap. What have we done? We've done logic bricks. Logic bricks are like blueprints, programming blueprints. And so far we've covered the first logic brick that we've covered this week, which is our keyboard sensor. I'm going to go back to that as an example. I'm going to go to game logic. And if you look at game logic, right now, by the way, look, our ground has no logic bricks because we're focused on the ground. These are all the objects that I have in my outliner. The only one that has logic bricks associated with is the hero object, right, which has all these logic bricks. I'm going to zoom out so you can see them. These logic bricks are just simple commands we've created so that the object can move left and right, up and down. But there are many, many, many other things we're going to add in here. And as we go forward, when we create games, we're going to add logic bricks and game properties to create our game. Okay? Any questions around this thing, logic bricks? Really cool. I'd like you to try and play around with it, right? There's a lot of stuff you can do with logic bricks. One of my favorite ones before we end, right, is the mouse look, right? If I'm going to do anything, I might as well, right? So I'm going to go add sensor, add a mouse type sensor. There's different kinds. This is the left button. I can click on the object, left button, but I can also do something called movement, right? My movement. If I click a movement option, I'm just going to zoom here so you can see what I'm talking about. Oops, there we go. So I've got my movement mouse option, and over here, I want to add another actuator in there. I can also go to mouse, right? And now, if you notice, it says mode is visibility. I want to change from visibility to look. What does this do? A basic functionality that all first-person shooter games like, right? It gives me that look function. I'm going to connect them together, right? And now I'm going to go back into our default mode. And I'll leave you this with this keen little thing. I'm going to press P for play. And now when I press my mouse up and down, my object actually looks up and down around. So now I can actually move forward, kind of, move my object. It can look up and down, right, as if I'm doing a mouse look. And I can even do some short leaps, right? Right. Flip around. Neat, huh? All with logic bricks, no programming. No programming, right? The idea here is that you want to be able to manipulate your objects. We've made some really cool meshes, right? But we want to use these bloody meshes, right? How do we do them? Logic bricks. And logic bricks are really, really cool to create simulations. And this is what this course is all about. I had to get you here to this point, right? So you have to create meshes, we have to do all these things in order for us to get here to this point where we're still going to start doing logic bricks. And for the rest of the course, we're going to do a mishmash of logic bricks with meshes so we can create our game for the final project we're going to do. Okay? Any questions around this? Assignment 2. Remember, it's due not this week, Friday, but next week, Friday. Please play your game. It's going to take 4 hours to play your game, right? Like I said, and do your review. It's all theory stuff, but it's important. I want you guys to also present your review of your game, not this Friday, but next Friday. Please be prepared for that because that's part of your mark. Okay? And that's it for me for today.